The darkness of space held many secrets, but none as dangerous as the massive warship that floated beyond Neptune's orbit. The ship had been drifting there for 300 years while humanity forgot about the wars that nearly destroyed their world. Inside the cold metal halls of the Titan's Wrath, Captain Jacob Barnes opened his eyes for the first time in decades and immediately knew something was wrong. Red lights flashed across his vision, and a mechanical voice echoed through the revival chamber, telling him that hostile forces had entered the solar system. His body felt heavy as the cryogenic sleep slowly released its grip on his muscles and bones. The year was 2287 and Earth was under attack. Jacob forced himself to sit up despite every nerve in his body screaming in protest. The revival process usually took hours, but the emergency protocols had accelerated everything to mere minutes. Around him, other pods were opening and his crew members were struggling to consciousness just as he was. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Grant emerged from the pod next to his with determination already burning in her dark eyes. She had been his second in command 3 centuries ago, when they volunteered to sleep aboard this forgotten weapon. Now she would need to be ready for battle before her body had fully thawed. The ship's artificial intelligence, named Oracle, materialized as a blue hologram in the center of the revival bay. Her voice was calm despite the dire news she carried. 47 alien vessels had crossed into human space without warning and were moving directly toward Earth. They had ignored every attempt at communication, and their weapons were charging. Oracle explained that Earth's modern military consisted of patrol ships designed for piracy prevention and mining escorts. Nothing in humanity's current arsenal could stop an invasion fleet. The aliens called themselves the Krell Dominion, and they had sent a simple message to Earth's government: submit or be harvested. Jacob pulled himself to his feet and started moving toward the bridge, even though his legs wobbled with each step. Lisa followed close behind, and together they made their way through corridors that hadn't seen human footsteps in generations. The ship responded to their presence like a sleeping giant waking from a long dream. Lights flickered on as they passed, and distant machinery hummed to life deep within the vessel's core. Oracle guided them through the maze of passages, while simultaneously reviving the rest of the 200 crew members who had volunteered for this eternal watch. They had all known that humanity might need them again someday, but none had imagined it would be against creatures from another world. The bridge was enormous and filled with stations that looked ancient compared to the sleek technology Earth used now. Jacob dropped into the captain's chair and his hands moved across controls that felt both familiar and foreign after so much time. Screens blazed to life, showing him the tactical situation, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The Krell fleet was massive, and their ships bristled with weapons that Earth's analysts couldn't even identify. They were 3 days away from Earth at their current speed, and nothing stood between them and humanity's homeworld except one old warship that the galaxy had forgotten. Lisa took her position at the tactical station and began analyzing the enemy vessels with the intensity that had made her legendary during the collapse. Wars. She had been the youngest tactical officer in Earth's fleet back then, and her strategies had saved millions of lives. Now she studied these alien ships with the same sharp focus, looking for weaknesses that might not exist. The Krell vessels were larger than anything humanity had built, and their energy signatures suggested power systems far beyond Earth's current technology. But Lisa noticed something interesting about their shield frequencies. They cycled in predictable patterns, as if the Krell had never faced an enemy who could exploit such a weakness. Communications. Officer Paul Bennett managed to establish a secure channel with Earth Defense Command, despite his hands still shaking from the revival process. Admiral Victoria Hayes appeared on the main screen, and her face showed the strain of someone who had been awake for days dealing with an impossible crisis. She looked at Jacob with a mixture of hope and skepticism. The Titan's Wrath was a relic from a darker time in human history, when nations built weapons capable of destroying entire continents. The Star Destroyer had been deemed too dangerous for peacetime and left to drift in the outer solar system as a monument to humanity's near extinction. Now that ancient weapon might be Earth's only salvation, Jacob requested full authorization to engage the enemy, and Admiral Hayes hesitated for only a moment before granting it. She had no other options, and they both knew it. Earth's civilian population was beginning to evacuate major cities, but there was nowhere to run if the Krell decided to sterilize the planet. Hayes promised to provide any support she could, but they both understood that the Titan's wrath would fight alone. The modern Earth fleet would take up defensive positions around the planet, but everyone knew they were just a speed bump for the invasion force. Chief Engineer Danny Martinez arrived on the bridge still pulling on his uniform and immediately began bringing the ship's main systems online. The reactor had been in standby mode for 3 centuries, but the automated maintenance systems had kept it in remarkable condition. Danny's fingers flew across his console as he initiated the startup sequence for the fusion core. The reactor was an experimental design that had been considered too volatile for regular use. It could generate enough power to light up a small city, but it could also explode with the force of a nuclear weapon if something went wrong. Danny had spent years perfecting the reactor before they went into cryosleep, and now he would trust his life to those ancient calculations. The ship shuddered as the main reactor came fully online and power surged through systems that had been dormant for longer than most of Earth's current population had been alive. Weapon batteries deployed from hidden ports along the hull and targeting systems began scanning for threats. The main railgun extended from the ship's bow like the barrel of some impossible artillery piece. It was designed to fire 3-ton projectiles at a fraction of light speed, with enough force to crack open planetary shields. Against starships, it would be devastating if they could get close enough to use it. Oracle reported that all essential systems were operational, and the crew was at 70% combat readiness. The remaining 30% would come online as more crew members completed their revival and reached their stations. Jacob ordered the ship to break orbit and set course to intercept the Krell fleet. The Titan's wrath began to move, and its ancient engines pushed it forward with surprising speed. The ship had been built for war, and every system was designed with one purpose in mind: overwhelming force delivered with precise brutality. The Krell would soon learn that humanity had not forgotten how to fight, and the old warship would teach them that lesson written in fire and fury across the dark void between worlds. The Krell Dominion did not take threats lightly, and when their sensors detected the ancient human warship powering up in the outer solar system, they decided to send a message. 5 of their destroyers broke formation and accelerated toward the Titan's wrath with weapons already charging for combat. The Krell commander aboard the lead ship transmitted a message in broken human language, telling the crew to surrender immediately or be vaporized. Jacob watched the incoming ships on his tactical display and felt a cold smile cross his face. The enemy had no idea what they were about to face. Lisa worked frantically at her tactical station, analyzing every detail of the approaching Krell vessels. Their hulls were composed of some kind of organic metal that seemed to shift and flow like living tissue. Energy readings showed massive plasma generators that could superheat matter to temperatures rivaling a star's core. The shields surrounding each ship pulsed with a rhythm that Lisa found fascinating. They weren't constant barriers, but rather waves of energy that cycled on and off in precise intervals. It was an efficient system that saved power, but it also created tiny windows of vulnerability. She began calculating firing solutions that would exploit those brief moments when the shields were at their weakest point. Chief Engineer Danny Martinez reported from the engine room that all weapon systems were fully operational, and the main railgun was loaded with its first round. The tungsten carbide slug weighed 3 tons and sat in the magnetic accelerator, waiting to be launched at speeds that would make it effectively unstoppable. Danny had spent the last 30 minutes running diagnostics on equipment that hadn't fired a shot in 300 years. Everything checked out perfectly, which either meant the automated maintenance systems had done their job, or they were about to find out the hard way that something critical had failed. He chose to believe in the machines that had kept the ship alive for so long. The Krell ships opened fire when they reached weapons range, and the void between them and the Titan's wrath filled with streams of green plasma bolts. Each shot carried enough energy to melt through a modern Earth warship's hull in seconds. The crew braced for impact as the first volley struck their shields. The electromagnetic barriers that protected the Star Destroyer flared brilliant blue as they deflected the incoming fire. Oracle reported shield strength at 92% and holding steady. The Krell weapons were powerful, but they were designed to overwhelm the defenses common in their conquered territories. They had never encountered shields based on magnetic deflection technology. Jacob gave the order to return fire, and Weapons Officer Kyle Turner brought the secondary batteries online. Dozens of smaller railguns mounted along the ship's flanks began tracking targets with mechanical precision. The weapons fired in sequence, sending streams of solid projectiles toward the Krell formation. The slugs were only a few kilograms each, but they moved fast enough that their kinetic energy was devastating. The first impacts caught the lead Krell ship by surprise. Its shields were cycling through a low point when 3 rounds punched through and tore into the organic metal hull. Atmosphere vented into space, and internal explosions rippled along the vessel's spine. The Krell adapted quickly and began evasive maneuvers while adjusting their shield frequencies. Their ships moved with surprising grace for such large vessels, weaving through space in patterns designed to make targeting difficult. But Lisa had anticipated this, and she fed new firing solutions to Kyle's station faster than the enemy could react. The Titan's wrath turned to bring more weapons to bear, and the ancient warship proved it could still dance despite its age. The experimental inertial dampeners built into the hull allowed the ship to change direction without crushing the crew under massive G-forces. It was technology that Earth had abandoned because it required too much power and was considered too dangerous. Now it gave them an edge the Krell hadn't expected. The battle became a deadly exchange of fire and fury as both sides sought advantage. The Krell concentrated their plasma weapons on specific points, trying to overwhelm the shield generators through focused bombardment. Warning klaxons blared across the bridge as shield strength dropped to 70%, then 60%. Danny rerouted power from non-essential systems to reinforce the barriers, but he knew they couldn't take this punishment forever. Meanwhile, Kyle continued firing the secondary batteries with methodical efficiency. 2 more Krell ships took damage and 1 lost its main, engines leaving it drifting and vulnerable. Jacob watched the tactical display and calculated angles and distances with the instinct of someone who had fought 100 battles. The enemy ships were trying to flank them, which meant they would present their broadsides for a few critical seconds. He waited for the perfect moment as the Krell maneuvered into position. When the lead destroyer turned to bring its full weapons array to bear, Jacob gave the order. Fire the main gun. The entire ship shuddered as the railgun discharged and sent its 3-ton projectile screaming through space at 40,000 kilometers per second. The tungsten carbide slug crossed the distance in a fraction of a heartbeat. The Krell captain probably never saw it coming. The projectile hit the destroyer's shields during a low cycle and passed through them like they weren't even there. The kinetic impact was so violent that it didn't just pierce the hull. It vaporized the entire front third of the ship in an explosion of superheated metal and plasma. The shockwave from the impact slammed into the 2 nearest Krell vessels and sent them tumbling off course with significant damage to their systems. The surviving crew aboard those ships suddenly realized they weren't fighting some primitive species. They were facing a weapon from an age when humanity had perfected the art of destruction. The remaining Krell ships broke off their attack and tried to retreat, but Kyle didn't give them the chance. The secondary batteries continued their relentless bombardment, targeting engines and weapon systems. Another destroyer exploded when a lucky shot penetrated its reactor shielding. The 5th ship managed to limp away, trailing atmosphere and debris, but it was clear the vessel was dying. Within 20 minutes of the first shot, all 5 Krell ships sent to destroy the Titan's wrath were nothing but expanding clouds of wreckage. Paul established communications with Admiral Hayes and transmitted the battle recordings. The Admiral's face showed shock and hope in equal measure. Earth had just won its first victory against an enemy that had conquered 63 other species. But the celebration was brief. Oracle detected the main Krell fleet changing course and accelerating directly toward them. 42 warships were now heading their way, and their commander was broadcasting threats that Oracle's translation software could barely process. The Krell Warmaster named Thex had decided that Earth would not be harvested for resources. Instead, the entire planet would be sterilized as punishment for destroying Dominion vessels. Jacob looked at his crew and saw determination on every face. They had bought Earth a small victory and shown the enemy that humanity could fight back. Now they needed to buy time for evacuation and defensive preparations. He ordered Navigator Claire Peterson to plot a course through the asteroid belt. If the Krell wanted to reach Earth, they would have to go through the Titan's wrath first, and Jacob intended to make them pay for every meter of space with blood and broken ships. The asteroid belt stretched out before them like a field of ancient stones waiting to witness the battle that would determine Earth's fate. Jacob knew they couldn't win against 42 warships in open combat, but they didn't need to win. They just needed to survive long enough for Earth to prepare its defenses and evacuate the cities that would be primary targets for orbital bombardment. Claire plotted a course that would take them deep into the densest part of the belt, where the massive rocks could provide cover and create obstacles for the pursuing fleet. The Titan's wrath accelerated forward and the Krell followed like hungry predators who had tasted blood and wanted more. The chase began in earnest as the Star Destroyer weaved between asteroids the size of mountains. Danny had revealed a secret about the ship that even Jacob hadn't fully understood during the collapse wars. The inertial dampeners weren't just powerful, but they were also far more sophisticated than anyone had realized. The system could predict gravitational fields and adjust the ship's momentum in ways that seemed to break the laws of physics. It was technology that Earth had abandoned because it drew enormous amounts of power from the reactor and created stress points in the hull that could tear the ship apart if pushed too hard. But Danny had spent years perfecting the calibration before they went into cryosleep, and now his work was saving their lives with every impossible turn. The ETU Krell fleet split into 3 groups trying to surround the human ship and cut off any escape routes. War Master Thex commanded the pursuit from his flagship, and his rage burned through every transmission he sent. No primitive species had ever destroyed Dominion vessels and lived to tell about it. He broadcast orders to his captains telling them to disable the Titan's wrath and capture its crew alive so they could be executed publicly as a warning to any other species that might think of resisting. But his ships were having trouble keeping up with the ancient warship as it danced through the asteroid field with impossible grace. Lisa coordinated the defensive fire from her tactical station while simultaneously tracking all 42 enemy vessels on her displays. Every time a group of Krell ships got too close, she directed Kyle to unleash a barrage from the secondary batteries. The smaller railguns didn't have the devastating power of the main cannon, but they fired much faster and could target multiple enemies at once. Tungsten slugs streaked through space, finding their marks on Krell hulls that ventured too close. 2 more destroyers took critical damage and fell behind the pursuit, trailing atmosphere and debris. A 3rd ship made the mistake of trying to cut through a cluster of asteroids and miscalculated its path. The resulting collision shattered the vessel against a rock the size of a small moon. Hours passed in a blur of combat and desperate maneuvering. The crew worked with mechanical efficiency, despite the exhaustion that came from fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. Paul maintained constant communication with Earth Defense Command, relaying tactical data and receiving updates on the evacuation efforts. Admiral Hayes reported that millions of civilians were being moved to underground shelters, and the defense grid around Earth was coming online faster than anyone had thought possible. She also shared news that gave Jacob a spark of hope. The Viridian Collective had responded to Earth's distress call and was sending military support. The Viridians were a peaceful trading confederation, but they maintained a small fleet for defense, and they were willing to help humanity against the Krell aggression. The problem was that their ships were days away and the battle would be decided long before they arrived. The Titan's wrath took its first serious damage when 3 Krell cruisers managed to coordinate their fire on a single shield generator. The concentrated plasma bombardment overwhelmed the electromagnetic barrier and punched through to the hull. Explosions ripped through Deck 7, killing 12 crew members and injuring 20 more. Medical Officer Helen Brooks worked frantically in the ship's infirmary, treating burns and injuries while the battle raged around them. Emergency bulkheads sealed off the damaged sections, but the ship had lost one of its 6 main shield generators. Danny rerouted power to compensate, but everyone knew they were running out of time. Jacob made a decision that would either save them or doom them completely. He ordered Claire to set course for Zeta 9, which was an abandoned mining station deep in the asteroid belt. The facility had been shut down during Earth's economic collapse over a century ago, but its automated systems should still be functional. If they could reach the station, they might be able to resupply ammunition and make emergency repairs. It was a desperate gamble because the Krell would know exactly where they were going and could set up an ambush. But staying in open space meant certain death, so Jacob chose to take the chance. The journey to Zeta 9 took another 2 hours of running combat. Kyle reported that ammunition for the secondary batteries was down to 40%, and the main railgun had only 8 rounds remaining. Each 3-ton slug was custom manufactured and couldn't be replaced easily even if they found the raw materials. The ship's systems were showing strain from the constant maneuvering and combat. Warning indicators lit up across every station on the bridge, painting the crew's faces in shades of red and amber. But they were still alive and still fighting, which was more than the Krell had expected. The mining station appeared on their sensors like a ghost from humanity's past. Zeta-9 was a massive structure built into a large asteroid with docking facilities designed to handle cargo ships and mining vessels. Its exterior was scarred and weathered from decades of abandonment, but the power core still generated a faint energy signature. Jacob ordered the ship to dock at the main platform, and the Titan's Wrath slid into position with grinding metal sounds that echoed through the hull. The moment they locked into place, Danny led repair teams out onto the hull to patch the damage, while Kyle coordinated with the station's automated systems to access whatever ammunition remained in storage. The Krell fleet arrived 30 minutes later, but instead of finding easy prey, they discovered that Lisa had prepared a trap. During the journey to the station, she had programmed dozens of mining charges scattered throughout the surrounding asteroid field. Each charge was designed to break apart large rocks for mineral extraction, but they could also be reprogrammed as proximity mines. When the Krell ships entered the field, the charges detonated in a chain reaction of explosions that turned the space around Zeta-9 into a deadly maze. 4 enemy vessels were destroyed outright, and 6 more took serious damage as they tried to retreat from the unexpected ambush. Jacob ordered the ship to undock before the enemy could recover from the surprise. The Titan's Wrath emerged from behind the station with its main railgun already tracking the nearest target. The massive cannon fired and another Krell cruiser vanished in a ball of vaporized metal. The crew let out a cheer, but they all knew this was far from over. The enemy still had 30 ships left, and War Master Thex was coordinating his forces for a final assault that would crush the human resistance once and for all. War Master Thex had never experienced defeat in his 30 years of conquest across the galaxy, and he refused to let some ancient human vessel be the first. He split his remaining 30 ships into 3 attack wings and began a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm the Titan's Wrath from multiple angles. The Krell had studied their enemy during the running battle and understood now that the human ship was powerful but not invincible. Its shields were weakening and its ammunition had to be running low. All they needed was to press the attack hard enough and long enough until the primitive warship finally broke under the pressure. Jacob watched the enemy formations converge on his position and felt the weight of command settle heavily on his shoulders. Every decision he made in the next few minutes would determine whether his crew lived or died and whether Earth survived or burned. Lisa called out tactical warnings as she tracked the incoming threats, but even her brilliant mind couldn't find a clean solution to the problem they faced. They were surrounded by superior numbers with limited ammunition and damaged systems. The only advantage they had left was the element of surprise, and Jacob intended to use it one final time. The first Krell attack wing came in fast targeting. The ship's weakened shield generators with focused plasma fire. Kyle returned fire with the secondary batteries, but the railguns were running low on ammunition, and every shot had to count. The Titan's Wrath shuddered as multiple plasma bolts struck the shields and burned through in places where the generators couldn't maintain full coverage. Damage reports flooded in from all sections of the ship. Deck 12 had a hull breach and 15 crew members were trapped behind emergency bulkheads. The portside maneuvering thrusters were offline, leaving Claire struggling to keep the ship on course. Fire suppression systems activated in engineering where a power conduit had overloaded and filled the compartment with toxic smoke. Helen worked in conditions that would have broken most people as wounded crew. Members flooded into the medical bay faster than she could treat them. Burns from console explosions were the most common injury, followed by broken bones from being thrown against bulkheads during violent maneuvers. She moved from patient to patient with calm efficiency, even as the ship shook around her and the lights flickered. Her medical staff consisted of 3 nurses who had trained for this scenario 300 years ago, and were now living through the nightmare they had prepared for. Every life they saved was a small victory against the chaos trying to consume them all. Danny pushed his engineering teams to their absolute limits as they fought to keep critical systems operational. The main reactor was running at 115% of its designed capacity, which meant it could suffer a catastrophic failure at any moment. The inertial dampeners were showing stress fractures in their mounting brackets from the constant high-speed maneuvering. The shield generators were cycling between overload and near failure, with barely any margin left. But Danny refused to give up because giving up meant dying, and he had spent 3 centuries waiting for this moment to prove that his designs could save humanity when it mattered most. The second Krell attack wing tried to flank the Star Destroyer, but Jacob saw the maneuver coming. He ordered Claire to execute a full-power dive toward the largest nearby asteroid, using it as cover. The Titan's wrath accelerated downward relative to the Krell formation and disappeared behind several million tons of rock. The enemy ship split up, trying to track their target from multiple angles, but Lisa had anticipated this. She directed Kyle to fire the remaining secondary battery ammunition in a spread pattern that caught two Krell destroyers as they came around opposite sides of the asteroid. Both ships took critical hits and one suffered a reactor breach that killed everyone aboard in seconds. War Master Thex realized his prey was more dangerous than he had calculated and decided to commit his flagship to the battle. The Devastator was twice the size of any other Krell vessel and carried enough firepower to level a continent. Its arrival changed the tactical situation immediately, because every sensor on the Titan's wrath screamed warnings about the massive energy readings coming from the enemy command ship. The Devastator's main weapon was a plasma cannon that could sustain a beam capable of cutting through planetary crust. Against a single warship, it would be like using a sledgehammer to crush an insect. Jacob made a decision that seemed insane to everyone on the bridge. He ordered all remaining power diverted to the engines and set a collision course directly toward the Devastator. Claire protested that they would never survive ramming a ship that size, but Jacob had no intention of actually hitting it. He was betting everything on the assumption that War Master Thex had too much pride to back down from a direct challenge. The Titan's wrath accelerated to maximum speed, heading straight for the Krell flagship, while every remaining weapon system charged for one final devastating salvo. The two ships raced toward each other across the void, and neither captain was willing to alter course. The Devastator's plasma cannon began charging with energy readings that made Oracle's warning sound almost panicked. The Titan's wrath armed its last 7 railgun rounds and prepared to fire everything in a single overwhelming strike. The distance between them shrank rapidly as both vessels committed to their chosen paths. Crew members on both ships braced for impact, knowing that the next few seconds would decide everything. At the last possible moment before collision, Jacob gave 3 orders in rapid succession. Full reverse thrust to slow their forward momentum. Fire all weapons at the exact point where the Devastator's shields were cycling to their lowest strength. Redirect all shield power to the forward arc to absorb whatever return fire came their way. The Titan's wrath executed the commands with mechanical precision that would have been impossible for a human crew to coordinate. The main railgun fired all 7 remaining rounds in a single burst, while every secondary battery that still had ammunition added its fire to the barrage. The combined assault created a wall of kinetic death that slammed into the Krell flagship's shields. At the exact moment of their vulnerability, the Devastator's barriers collapsed. Under the concentrated bombardment and tungsten, slugs tore into its hull like bullets through paper. The massive ship's reactor took a direct hit from 3 of the railgun rounds, and the exotic matter that powered Krell technology became violently unstable. War Master Thex had only seconds to realize his pride had killed him before his flagship exploded with the force of a small nuclear weapon. The shockwave caught 3 nearby Krell vessels and destroyed them instantly. Debris from the explosion scattered across thousands of kilometers, creating a temporary asteroid field made of twisted metal and frozen bodies. The remaining Krell ships stopped their attack as if someone had cut their strings. Their commander was dead, and their most powerful vessel was gone. The human warship that should have been easy prey had instead become their nightmare. Without orders and facing an enemy that refused to die, the Krell captains made the only logical choice. They retreated at maximum speed, leaving their dead behind and carrying news that would shake the Dominion to its core. Humanity was not prey to be harvested, but a threat that demanded respect and caution. The victory tasted like ashes in Jacob's mouth as he surveyed the damage to his ship and crew. 37 people had died defending Earth, and twice that number lay wounded in the medical bay where Helen worked with exhausted determination. The Titan's wrath was barely functional, with hull breaches on 7 decks and half of its major systems running on emergency power. But they had won, and Earth was safe for now. Admiral Hayes broadcast a message from Earth Defense Command calling them heroes and thanking them for buying humanity precious time to prepare its defenses. The celebration lasted exactly 10 minutes before Paul intercepted a transmission that changed everything. The Krell had been broadcasting on encrypted channels that Oracle managed to decode using data captured from the destroyed ships. The messages revealed that the Dominion was assembling a much larger invasion fleet at a staging base in the Proxima Centauri system. 200 warships were gathering there, along with troop carriers and bombardment platforms designed to crack planets open like eggs. The fleet would arrive at Earth in 3 weeks, and nothing humanity currently possessed could stop it. Even with the Viridian Collective sending reinforcements, the odds were hopeless. Earth needed a miracle, and miracles were in short supply. Jacob called his senior officers to the bridge for an emergency meeting, while repair crews continued their desperate work throughout the ship. Lisa arrived with burns on her hands from manually rerouting power conduits when the automated systems failed. Danny looked like he hadn't slept in days, which was accurate since he had been awake for nearly 40 hours, keeping the reactor from melting down. Kyle moved with a limp from where he had been thrown against his console during the final battle with the Devastator. Claire had a bandage wrapped around her head covering a gash she received when a support beam collapsed near the navigation station. Helen joined them last, bringing news that 3 more crew members had died from their injuries despite her best efforts. The discussion that followed would determine not just their fate but potentially the fate of their entire species. Admiral Hayes had ordered them to return to Earth for repairs and to receive the medals and honors they deserved. But Jacob proposed something that made everyone in the room fall silent. Instead of running home to lick their wounds, they should take the fight to the enemy. Oracle had analyzed all the captured Krell data and identified the exact location of the staging base where the invasion fleet was assembling. If they could destroy that base, they would cripple the Dominion's ability to launch their attack and buy Earth months or even years to prepare proper defenses. Lisa was the first to speak, and she laid out the tactical reality with brutal honesty. The staging base, called Target Prime, was a massive orbital construct, defended by 40 warships with another 160 vessels docked for resupply and repairs. It was located deep in enemy territory surrounded by Krell-controlled systems. Getting there would require a faster-than-light jump that would leave them with barely enough fuel to make it back. The Titan's Wrath was operating at maybe 70% combat effectiveness after Danny's repair crews performed miracles with limited resources. They would be outnumbered 20-1 against an enemy that now knew exactly what they were capable of. The mission was suicide, and everyone knew it. But Danny pointed out that suicide was better than waiting for Earth to be sterilized by an unstoppable invasion force. He had studied the data on Target Prime and found a weakness in its design. The station's main reactor was similar to Krell ship reactors but scaled up to enormous size. If they could hit it with enough concentrated firepower, they might trigger a chain reaction that would destroy not just the station, but every ship docked there. It would be like setting off a bomb in the middle of an ammunition depot. The explosion would cripple the Dominion's invasion plans and send a message that humanity was not prey, but a predator willing to strike at the heart of its enemies. The vote was unanimous despite the odds. Every officer chose to continue the fight rather than return home to wait for death. Jacob sent a message to Admiral Hayes explaining their decision and requesting that she not court-martial them if they somehow survived. The Admiral's response came an hour later, and her face showed pride mixed with sorrow. She understood why they were doing this, and she promised that Earth would remember their sacrifice. The Viridian reinforcements would defend humanity's homeworld if the worst happened. But she also told them to come back alive because the galaxy needed heroes who refused to surrender even when victory seemed impossible. The crew spent the next week conducting repairs using every spare part and raw material they could salvage from Zeta 9 and the battlefield debris. Danny and his engineering teams worked miracles, bringing the ship up to 70% combat readiness. Kyle coordinated with the automated mining facility to manufacture new railgun ammunition using asteroid minerals. They managed to produce 12 rounds for the main cannon and enough smaller slugs to reload half the secondary batteries. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. Helen treated the wounded and prepared the medical bay for casualties she knew were coming. Paul upgraded the communication systems to handle the quantum encryption the Krell used so they could listen to enemy transmissions. Claire plotted the jump coordinates to Proxima Centauri, checking and rechecking every calculation because one mistake would leave them stranded in deep space. The day came when there was nothing left to do but commit to their chosen path. Jacob stood on the bridge and looked at the faces of his crew. They were exhausted and scared, but none of them suggested turning back. They had all volunteered 300 years ago to be humanity's last line of defense, and now they would fulfill that oath one final time. Oracle began the countdown for the faster-than-light jump, while Danny brought the reactor up to maximum output. The ship vibrated with barely contained energy, as exotic particles formed a bubble around the hull that would punch a hole through normal space. The jump felt like dying and being reborn in the same instant. Reality twisted and reformed, and suddenly they were in the Proxima Centauri system, staring at Target Prime on their displays. The station was enormous, dwarfing even the largest asteroid mining facilities Earth had ever built. Krell warships surrounded it in defensive formations, while hundreds more sat docked at berths that extended from the structure like metallic tentacles. Every sensor on the Titan's Wrath screamed warnings about the weapons locked onto them. They had seconds before the enemy opened fire. Jacob gave the order to attack at maximum speed, heading straight for the station's reactor core. Lisa fed targeting data to Kyle, who armed every weapon they had. The Titan's Wrath accelerated forward, and the final battle began with the fury of a species that refused to go quietly into extinction. The ship's engines burned bright enough to light up the darkness as humanity's answer to the Krell Dominion roared across space, carrying the hope and rage of an entire world in its ancient heart.